Alright, before I start this podcast, I would like to thank everyone that has made this possible. A big thank you to my very talented spirit brother Mo, who made the opening theme so seamlessly and who was more excited for this podcast than even me. Cheers to you, brother. Another shout out to Chantel Noor, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, who captured my very vivid imagination on paper for the logo while enhancing it with her own creative juices. Also, a very special shout out to a friend who brought me my first mic many moons ago when I wanted to do this, but I could never commit to it. And finally, all of you listeners who find it worthwhile to tune into the ramblings of a madman. I'm truly humbled and I'm very happy to have you all here. And now, before I lose track and bore you all with my preface, let us transcend. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Absurdist. My name is Animesh Kapoor, and I am your spirit guide, here to take you on a ludicrous flight atop trans-dimensional owls, to lands far and near, within and without, above and below. So close your eyes and concentrate on your forehead, and let the expansion commence. Alright, the first podcast finally, after 4 years in the waiting. I wanted to do this way back in 2016 and 17, and well, then I just sat on the idea for such a long time that I eventually even forgot that I had an idea to begin with. But it was reinvigorated very recently by a friend of mine, and I thought might as well. I'll be turning 30 in a few months, so there's this is the time to experiment with things. This one would be the first podcast, obviously, so this might turn out better than I expect, might even turn out worse. So take it for what it is, the first podcast. I'm sure there is a lot to learn, there's a lot to get better at, and I will as time progresses. This one is called The Hermit of Metropolis. Now, initially, I wrote a script for this podcast, as I did for others as well. But when I sat down and recorded them, they seemed so scripted that I chalked all of that and thought I should do improvs, at least in terms of a podcast. I mean, this has more of a human element to it. That one just seemed really rehearsed to me, and I kept, kept trying to make it better and better and better and better, and eventually it just wasn't working out. So I'm going to record this as thoughts come, as ideas flow, and I'll keep this as raw as I possibly can. Now, as I was saying, this one is titled The Hermit of Metropolis. It's a podcast about me. Since I don't have any guests and I don't know when I will have guests, maybe in the second or the third, maybe in the third podcast actually. This one would be more of an interview of myself. I'll talk a little bit about my journey, and maybe it's something you guys would like. Maybe you can take some lessons from it. Maybe you can learn something from it. Maybe even learn something from my own mistakes. So, yeah, I'll keep it as uncensored and raw as possible. I want to start with, I think, where every journey starts, with my birth. I was born in 1990, 30 years ago. And when I was born, I was a very weak child. My mother says that I was so severely underweight that I was kept in the incubator for a while. I think I was 1.8 or 2 kgs or something like that. So an underweight child, and I was kept in the incubator for a few days. Also, because I was an underweight child, like most children who are weak when they're born, I had a lot of health issues. Let me just put it that way. As I was growing up, I was also very prone to accidents. I used to fall down a lot. I used to injure myself quite a bit. I had this tendency of just falling down ever so often. Also very sickly. I used to get ill very fast. My immunity was very, very poor. Um, yeah, I mean, I had a very, very vivid imagination, though. That has been my only constant in life. Everything changes, that imagination has consistently stayed for this long. So, I joined the school, St. Columbus, and studied there from the kindergarten. And I was all right in studies, I think, all the way till my fifth standard. Um, though I was always good at studies, but I think inherently, or something you're just predisposed to. I was always predisposed to a sort of how do I put it? I found making connections very difficult. That really means making friends very difficult, even as a child. That's not something you find difficult as a child. That's something you find difficult as a teen. But I always found making friends to be a slightly difficult thing, or maybe just keeping friends, maybe, if not making them really. Um, yeah, I think keeping them was the difficult part. Making friends was easy. Um, all right, so from the kindergarten all the way till my fifth, I was exceptionally good in studies, and I had a fairly artistic bent of mind. So I was very good at arts as well, drawing, sketching, things like that, crafts, whatever a child can do. Not exceptionally good at sports, not initially at least. Yeah, so I reached the fifth standard, and something, I think at least, that was a shift in my consciousness in the fifth standard. Um, I was an all right child. I wasn't particularly unhappy or anything like that, but as I said, making connections or sustaining connections was difficult. But that was the only part. I didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. If I had the awareness to even reflect on a topic like that or concept like that, of whether that is out of the ordinary or not. But I distinctly remember that in the fifth standard, something happened that I guess might have altered my neural chemistry. I fell sick in the fifth standard. I got typhoid, I think. Not think, I mean, I got typhoid. And I was out of school for about a month or so, maybe more. um, and then I went back to school, and about 2 months later I got typhoid again. So this dual diagnosis, this dual infection that I got so soon from each other. The interval was so short that I think my body went into some sort of a shock. This time the typhoid was also much, much more severe. I remember I used to just lay in bed for days and days at an end, and my mother was exceptionally worried. Most of the people were worried because a child of in the fifth standard doesn't really have the strongest immunity within, and I was always a sickly child anyway. So getting this infection twice and almost being in something of a mortal peril the second time that I was infected with it just seemed to scare everyone witless. But I recovered, and I don't think that the person who fell ill and the person who recovered were the same people when I look back, or at least in terms of consciousness. I think there was some sort of ripple that happened, and the person that recovered was distinct enough from the person who fell ill that you could um, say that something changed very, very drastically. And the thing that changed very, very drastically, I think, was this sort of reclusive nature that, though might have always been there, but something I think prompted it because of the dual infection. I just stopped even trying to make friends or even trying to connect with people. It was very, very difficult for me, to say the least. All right, so that was a strange time, some sort of a paradigm shift in my life, I think, where something inside me changed. And only in retrospect do we actually look back at these things and say, all right, that might have been a defining moment in my life. But now, in retrospect, when I do actually look back at it, I definitely think that something transpired then. As such, I was also from a dual faith sort of a family background. My mother was Catholic, and my father was from a predominantly Hindu family, but they were not practicing Hindus. They were generally atheistic. So the only religious influence that I had in my childhood was predominantly Catholicism. Um, as such, in school, I always used to want to go to catechism, but since my last name was Kapoor, I was never allowed to go for that. A Christian school, of course, it was St. Columbus, but they were very strict about these things. Someone from the other faith was not allowed to go to the uh, catechism classes, which is something I found particularly distasteful in retrospect. I think it gave me some sort of an identity crisis where finding your place in the world, a question that you only start experimenting with, only start looking for the answers to that question when you're in your early 20s. But for me, it was a much earlier um, question, even way before I actually started entering my teens, or right at the time when I started entering my teens. This question of where is my place in the world plagued my senses. Huh. So, someone who does not have a lot of friends, or someone who does not connect with people very well, and after the the dual typhoid episode, the entire human connection sort of went out the window. And this identity crisis, I found it very easy to lose myself in a world of imagination. As I said, I was a very creative child. Thankfully, that is one thing the typhoid didn't take away from me. But yes, so I was a very creative child, and right during this time, a lot of fantasy books, and at least in terms of popular culture, in terms of books, you had the right kind of fodder for your imagination. For example, Harry Potter was one of them. Goosebumps was another one. Animorphs. These are very potent in terms of imagination, these works of fiction. So, for a child who does not have any other outlet, this seemed like the appropriate one. So, I got into reading really, and a certain sense of a geekdom that I got into, made, I wouldn't say friends, but definitely hung out with people who were of a similar uh, disposition, where they loved losing themselves to their imaginations. So, yeah, I mean, I was also a very good artist. I used to draw really well. I remember this very funny incident, funny only in retrospect. Back then, it seemed like something only only someone who has suffered from some sort of cranial damage would do. I used to draw ridiculous things in my exam sheets. For example, I remember in my sixth standard exam sheet, I drew dinosaurs and dragons and things like that on the last page. On your exam sheet. I mean, I understand if you want to make them in your textbooks, but who does that in their exam sheets, for Christ's sake? So that was only in retrospect does it seem funny, to be honest. Back then, it might have been the cringiest thing. I mean, I used to feel embarrassed for my imagination a lot of times. I used to feel embarrassed for being, being so different in that aspect. Um, Another thing that happened that I should talk about before I lose the chronology of the incidents. Um, in the fifth standard, when I got this dual typhoid, I remember how sharply my marks felt after that. Like I was good in studies, not even average. I was good, and then this happened, and the teachers were like, well, he felt sick 2 times in a year, but it's fine. Send him to the sixth standard. But they sent me to the sixth standard, and I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't cope with the studies. I couldn't cope with academics after that. That's another reason why I think something changed in my neural chemistry. Um, I used to I got so bad in studies, so bad that in the sixth standard, out of 100, I got 3 in mathematics. 3. Let that sink in. Take a moment while I sip my coffee. I got 3 out of 100. That's good. So I got 3 out of 100, and also strangely enough, as much as I am all right in my language capabilities in English, predominantly in terms of communication. I was pathetic in school. I didn't used to speak. I was one of those creepy, quiet kids, you know. So my English was no better than any other subject. I mean, of course, not as bad as 3 out of 100, but 20, 30 out of 100. Yeah, that was 30 was a good day for me. 30, yeah, that's a good day. You know, and just constantly losing myself to this imaginary world that I built for myself. I used to come home, I used to sleep. I used to sleep for 8 hours after coming back home, and then I used to sleep again at night, sometimes 16 hours, 17 hours I used to sleep because I used to love dreaming. Because in your dreams, you are a god. You create your own universe. I used to be very good at lucid dreaming back then. That's something that I really, and that's another reason why I used to love sleeping, because I was so good at being aware that I was dreaming and accomplishing possibilities that you could not even realize in material reality. Flying, for him, for that matter, creating objects out of thin air, things like that. So, that was that. And around the same time, I think around the sixth and the seventh standard, after being in this perpetual state of alienation and now hitting puberty, and the testosterone kicking in, and you start realizing uh, you have such inbuilt rage, such detest at times, that I was a very angry child as well. Violent, but not right now. Violent later on, but definitely very angry, a very pissed off person. Like, you would look at me and I'm like, huh, what? That kind of an annoying prick. So, so that was that. This stayed uh, as the same in terms of disposition in my head. This kind of psychological state was pretty stable till my eighth standard. I don't know how I used to pass classes, sixth to seventh, and then seventh to eighth, and then eighth was the worst, I think. I think that was one of my lowest states. This is when you are sort of developing some sort of a body image of yourself as well, and you look at yourself in the mirror, and I had these terrible acne and things like that, and I used to detest what I see. So this and this is something every teenager goes through. It's not something that's unique to me, but that's that. So eighth standard was pretty bad, and things at home were not always great. I mean, we had issues, but yeah, this eighth standard really took a toll on me. It got so bad, I think, that I used to bunk school a lot, and I didn't go to schools quite often. When I used to sit for my examination, I didn't used to write anything. Empty sheets I used to hand over. When they used to give me zeros, I never brought them home. I used to burn them, the exam papers. My parents didn't know that this is what's going on. Give me a moment. Let me just have some coffee. So parents didn't know what was going on, because I wasn't the kind of person who talked a lot. Around the eighth standard, also, I developed an intense liking for heavy metal music. So I used to love just sitting in my room, blasting heavy metal, headbanging, listening to violent things and things I want to do to people. And that teenage angst, really. Everyone's heard Slipknot in their teenagers, and everyone's wanted to break stuff and, I don't know, destroy things and burn stuff. So that sort of teenage angst really was really strong. Um, so I failed in class eighth, and the moment I failed, like, everything just fucking stopped for me. Kids who were my juniors now used to call me failure, things like that. That really used to fucking bother me. So about 1 week in this repeated class, they gave me this opportunity to change my stream from CBSE to NIOS. And my father was apprehensive, but he finally understood why it's important, I think. And yeah, my stream changed. What I didn't know was the price that I would have to pay for that. We went to a counselor in the school, and I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia as well, both of them. Um, so that was a strange time, being told that you have a learning disability, and this is way before younglings had movies like Tare Zameen Par, and things that used to address mental issues. This is way before that. um, so you didn't have a frame of reference. For you, someone telling you that you have a learning disability inherently meant that you're disabled in some sort of mental capacity. So that's the reason why they said that NIOS would be better for people like us, because you could choose subjects and they were a little more eclectic and also easier as opposed to CBSC. So we were taken out of our classrooms, and we were sent to this underground, well, not underground, in the basement of the school, this center they used to run over there called the Enrichment Center. Now, compared to everyone else, a few people were like me as well, but most of them were very severely disabled. Some of them were savants, some were autistic. Some people had genuine issues over there, compared to, you know, people like me. We didn't feel like we fit in. I guess some of us did. We didn't feel like we fit in, and the stigma associated with being the special needs child in the school where the rest of the populace is perfectly fine was also something that is a real blow to your self-esteem. But it was a blessing in disguise, and the teacher who was handling us handling us was called, her name was Renu Basin, and a saint of a woman, a saint of a woman. Before her, I was this very pissed off and angry, insecure uh, kid. And the moment we landed in her class, very soon I realized that I have an inherent talent for language, and she was the one who actually, uh, brought me out of my shell and told me that this is something that is unique to me. This is something that I can work upon and excel at. And it is only because of her that I earned the kind of livelihood that I earned since my school days. You know, the most of my work experience has predominantly been language oriented. So it was that woman, that saint of a woman, who made me realize that. She saw promise in me when I couldn't see anything. Being in this center was a very big blow to self-esteem, mainly because all of a sudden you're at the bottom end of the social hierarchy. You're at the absolute bottom end of the social hierarchy. I mean, you're the special needs child. What could possibly be lower than you? Um, you know. But as I said, in multiple ways, it was a blessing in disguise, because this experience humbled me. Uh, Maybe if I would have been in regular classes and in regular school, and maybe would have built upon my own repertoire of skills, I might have been a very different person, someone who was very arrogant, and someone who didn't care about anyone, someone who um, wasn't a good person. Let's just put it that way, inherently, because you see so many of them. I see so many of them, people who don't know shit, talking as if they know everything. People who are mediocre or even worse in terms of talent and things like that. Think they're the best shit in the world. You find them every day. I have friends like that. So many friends like that. And even though I have friends like that, I'm like, that's fine. If I know that they aren't great at something and I'm substantially better at it, I would still say, yeah, yeah, you're wonderful, you're wonderful, you're better than anything that I've seen before, because it doesn't it doesn't harm me in any way. You understand? This experience of being at the very shallow end of the social hierarchy rendered my self confidence to this state of very distinct self sufficiency. What I mean is that, I have nothing to prove to anyone. I don't have to compete with anyone. My only competition is myself. The only person I have to prove something is to myself. If someone thinks they're better than me, well, wonderful, you are. If someone thinks that they, that I'm shit, well, that's fine. It doesn't matter. You understand? The collective experience of being this child with a very potent imagination, being someone who didn't have a lot of friends, things like that, all of them combined together rendered me very, very self sufficient. I knew early on in life that, I don't need anyone other than myself, that the only person I can rely on is myself. I know it doesn't sound as great when you say it out loud, but self sufficiency is not something that most people experience in their life. Most people reach their 50s and 60s and never know how to live without another person. They have such a distinct trait of constantly relying on someone else for their inner state of being. This constant need for validation, this constant need for someone else's approval. Now, I got over that very, very quickly and very, very soon. Yeah. Yes. So, you know, introversion, I think, is a is a very strong weapon that has to be wielded very, very carefully, because it can also be a source of extreme unhappiness. But it can also be a source of, or a symptom at least, of of higher awareness earlier in life. Everyone becomes an introvert as time progresses. You know, you had 10 friends in school, then you had 4 friends in college, then you had 2 friends at work, then you got married and you had no friends other than your wife, and then you had children and then you had no time for making new friends. I know it sounds very cruel, but that's what it is. Everyone with time becomes an introvert. The moment you're in your 50s and your 60s, it's very, very difficult for people to connect with other people, because your inwards journey generally, starts the moment you uh, start questioning everything. And most people at least who are extroverted, don't question things because because they're never alone with their thoughts, because they surround themselves with so many external stimuli. So, with age, when the extrovertism sort of starts waning because of external circumstances, because everyone is busy in their life and things like that, your friends are busy with their families, friends are busy with their lives, things like that. When you become introverted without your own, without purposely trying to be introverted, that's when people actually start awakening to these higher concepts of life, these more internal concepts of life. Um, Introversion is very, it's as I said, it's a very strong weapon to be wielded with caution, though. You know it can help extremely, it can help a lot with character shaping. It can help with self-sufficiency. It can, you can start, you get a head start. That's precisely what I mean. You get a head start of your inwards journey the sooner you become introverted in life. Also, the moment you become introverted, your whole interpersonal relationship with people becomes very selective. You have only a few friends or people that you rely on. Your partner understands what they're getting into when they get into a relationship with you. Your parents understand what kind of a person you are. Things like that. The sooner you manifest this internal state of being, of detachment, the better it is. Introversion is inherently detachment. The more self aware you become of your introversion, the more you understand that you are inherently detached, and it's a very good thing. Um, so, this then, yes, so this, eighth standard and this enrichment center that we went to where we were special needs children. Um, I got this when my teacher, Renu Basin, told me that language is something good. And then I became a prefect. And all of a sudden, from being the disenfranchised, the absolute low end of the social hierarchy, all of a sudden I was, blessed with these new opportunities and new um, powers, let's say, I guess. This newfound approval, this newfound power. Because also around this time, I was at the peak of my puberty. I must have been like 14, 15. So, this is around the same time when there are so many hormonal changes happening in you that it's very easy to lose yourself to any form of validation, which I did lose myself to forms of validation. The introversion, self-sufficiency, and all of that. Only in retrospect, all of that makes sense. Back when it was happening, for all the romantic ideals I put to it of self-sufficiency and not needing anyone's approval, back then I did, as every teenager does. So, this newfound approval and this newfound power, and I got really deep into heavy metal. And I used to listen to a lot of black metal, and metalcore was also something that was very popular back then as a subgenre. Metalcore, power metal, a lot of new metal. So I was just really, really into the metal lifestyle. Like, um, it's funny, but like burning stuff. Not an arsonist, but I remember this friend of mine, and we used to get a lot of notebooks, and as sad as that it is, from our earlier classes, like notebooks of the fifth standard, sixth standard, seventh standard, and we used to burn them while blasting heavy metal. So this also heavy metal lyrically often talks a lot about repressed rage and subsequently the occult, which I will come to in a while. But that repressed rage started manifesting in very strange ways, where till now, I may have been the person that was bullied, but now I felt like I should exert that kind of power as well, you know. So I became the bully for a brief time, 2 years, but I was an asshole for 2 years. Um, in school, I used to pretend to be all timid and proper and all of that. The moment we exited school and I got in my bus, I mean, I used to fight all the way from when my bus started from my school till my home. It used to be 1.5 hours, and no one used to say anything. I used to feel like a gunda, and I used to enjoy feeling like a goon, you know picking on people because I was picked on at some point. The abuser becomes the abused, the abused becomes the abuser, the cyclical uh, trauma that manifests in strange ways. So I used to love that. I used to love, and I used to pick a fight with everyone. I mean, people twice, thrice my size. Often I used to get beaten up, but often I used to beat people as well. I mean, I used to love fighting for some reason. Like violence was something I really, really enjoyed. Like some sort of an outlet, I guess. Everyone, I think, in their teenagers experiences that. Um, I think the power of the newfound approval, the newfound skill sets, sort of got to my head, and of course, heavy metal might have been a strong source for that as well. I'm not saying heavy metal is bad. I'm simply saying that heavy metal is a very good outlet, and maybe I should have stuck to the music instead of actually physically becoming violent. But it's only things you can think about. They've already happened. And all right, and occult, as I was saying, occult was something that heavy metal introduced me to. A lot of heavy metal was had a lot of occult lyrics, and this is around the same time when internet was also somewhat in its infancy. At least the websites used to take ages to open. I remember 30-minute YouTube videos, 10-minute YouTube videos used to take 30 minutes to buffer. India didn't have great internet back in 2000. Was it? 4, 5, 6, I think, somewhere around that time. So that was a strange time. I got so into occult. I used to search for esoteric concepts on YouTube and blog posts with strange encrypted nonsense. MSN Messenger. I was in groups on MSN Messenger, Yahoo Messenger. Back then it was a strange, different world. It was much less censored than today. Oftentimes, you used to run across things that you should not run across, and they would tarnish you forever. um, so I was a part of a lot of these occult message groups and things like that. I was really, really fascinated by all of it. But I didn't have a structure to it. I didn't know how to, like, I didn't know the first thing of getting into it. The only things that I learned were predominantly things I could never utilize because we didn't have availability of a lot of these things that were being discussed in India. Because a lot of these things that were discussed on the message boards in India, in on MSN and Yahoo and all of these things, was predominantly ceremonial magic, which requires these very elaborate robes and ingredients, sulfur and salt and things like that, and essences. Not a lot of these things were available in India back then. So, um, it got uh, uh, tedious fast because I couldn't do anything, because I couldn't track my progress, because I couldn't really experiment with all of that I was learning. In my mind, it was all very fascinating, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I think a lot of it has to do with Harry Potter as well for a lot of people. Harry Potter introduced more people to concepts of occult than most other books did, at least in the recent 50 years, at the very least. At the very, very least. Um, yeah, so, that was quite something. Also, in the same center, I made a friend called Shiva. I'll get him on the podcast maybe in the third episode or something like that. Um, yeah, I mean, it's very surprising that both of us were in this, disenfranchised condition in this place, and both of us had very different lives, but we have sort of converged at this point in our life where our paths are very similar. He's into the same things that I'm into the same things that he is. Back then, we didn't have a lot of similarities except maybe heavy metal and maybe wanting to form a band and things like that. So, yeah, and we didn't used to get along as well back then. I mean, sometimes we did, most of the times we didn't. So, very strange how life is so cyclical that it sort of comes back to a point in time that you've already experienced before, like an evolved form of deja vu. I do think that most of the people that you meet in your life have some sort of a role to play in your ascension, in your higher understanding of the world or existence itself. So, then I got better at studies again. I started getting slightly better, even though I was experimenting with so many different things. But I got slightly better at studies, maybe, not maybe, really. Most definitely because of the teacher, Renu Basin. And then, in the 10th standard, once I gave the examination for NIOS after 2 years, I cleared my 10th. Secondary school was done for. But, I couldn't move to CBSE in the same school because they wouldn't allow it. So, after a lot of hesitation, my mother decided to put me in a co-ed school to complete my 12th from CBSE. Now, believe you me, before this, I was in an all boys school, so I had no experience with the opposite gender. All of a sudden, being thrown in this mix, it was very, very awkward for me. But when I started getting attention from the opposite sex, as awkward as it was, I also, I started enjoying attention from the opposite sex. I guess most of your life you spend, at least your teenagers and all, you spend wondering whether you're desired or not. And then all of a sudden, when you are desired, it's very easy for it to go to your head as well. So, this tumultuous time, really, 4 years at least, very, very tumultuous, very strange, or just these, coming of age things that happen. And when you look back at them, when you think back on them, they sound so fantastical. They sound so strange. All right, so it's almost like this coming of age, concept. It's a coming of age story, really. When you watch movies and things like that, you're like, oh well, well, that doesn't happen, but it does happen. A lot of these things happen with you, but you only realize them in retrospect. When you're going through them, none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense. But believe you me, I mean, trust me. Um, if you become more aware of yourself as time progresses, and then you look back on things, everything, almost, let me extend an olive branch, almost everything starts making sense, really. Almost everything. So, that was also a strange time, getting attention from the opposite sex. That was also something like a drug, if you ask me. Something very addictive, something very, very uh, addictive is the word for it, actually. Addictive about that. Especially when you are only, I mean, you're still in your teens, ideally. So when it happens in your teens, it's very, very addictive. When it happens in your late 20s, you don't fucking care. Or when it happens in your 20s at all, actually, you stop caring post 24, 25 years of age, because most of the carnal is too strong a word, but most of the uh, experiences in terms of the opposite sex would be confined to your early 20s. The moment you start transcending towards the later part of your 20s, most of those experiences don't appeal to you as much. For me, at least. I don't know about you. All right, so then I completed my 12th, and then I got into the Bible college, actually. Strangely enough. I think I had this inherent, such a strong inherent thirst for the more esoteric concepts of life. And the only outlet I got back then was the Bible college, because I knew that there was this subject in, Bible college called angelology, which was the study of these higher dimensional beings, these celestial beings, angels, cherubims, seraphims, ophaniums, things like that. So these very strong celestial archetypes that I found them very, very fascinating. Really, that's the only reason why I got into Bible college. But I think that I fell into some concept of love. I fell in love, like all people do at that age, and I left Bible college for that. I Yes, that's why I left it, actually. After I left it, I joined WWF, which was Worldwide Fund for Nature. I mean, it was World Wildlife Foundation way back, but it's Worldwide Fund for Nature. I joined as a volunteer, um, because I really liked that field, wildlife and wildlife sciences and things like that. I really wanted to do something about that. I wanted to become, something like a like a naturalist, which I did became eventually. But back then I hadn't a clue of what I was doing. So anyway, so I got into that, and the love thing didn't work out, like most don't initially. And around this time, the moment it didn't work out, I think I spiraled into this state of self-pity and downward spiral. I became very destructive again. I became very self-destructive, actually, not destructive towards others. I used to drink incessantly, and I had a lot of bad habits. Let me just put it that way. Nothing too major. I wasn't injecting stuff in my veins, but I used to drink excessively, and I used to I guess, fornicate excessively and things like that. Give me a moment, let me drink water. So, yeah. Um, so you used to, fornicate excessively and drink excessively and things like that. And, I got really nihilistic. I got really existentialist. Um, I got really, a nihilist is the word for it. To an extent, very hedonistic, where pleasure was the only thing that mattered, nothing else did. This must be around 2010, 11, something like that. So, you know, it's very strange. Uh, it was a very strange time because this is around the time when all these e-commerce websites were really really blowing up. For example, Flipkart, things like that. So around the time when I became so hedonistic, I had a very strange experience. A very I wouldn't call it supernatural, but just a very strange experience. Let me just put it that way. This was amongst the first, not the first, well, maybe the second, very strange experience of my life that I can pinpoint to and say, all right, that served a purpose. Because a lot of strange experiences in people's lives don't really serve a purpose. I know for a matter of fact that this one did. And the purpose it served was some sort of a reinvigoration of my thirst for knowledge, my thirst for the more esoteric side of things, more abstract side of things. So when this strange experience happened, this is around the same time when Flipkart really was blowing up. And for me personally, this new world opened up, this new avenue of knowledge that I could now tap into, because now I could buy books, imported books, which would be delivered to my house. Concepts, esoteric books, books on high magic, books on chaos magic, books. The amount of books I bought. I remember my salary was barely 20,000 back then, and I used to spend 16,000. I spent 16,000 on books in 1 month. 16,000. And this was a pattern. I remember 16,000 was once. I spent 8,000 on books a few months later. Then I spent 9,000 again for about a year and a half. I mean, if nothing, I must have bought at least a lakh or more uh, in terms of worth of books, and I used to go through them like like eating some sort of a delicious cake. I used to read like a madman. I didn't sleep for 16, 17 hours. I just used to finish books in one go at times. And very strange, very I mean, I was tapped into some sort of a strange mind frame back then. I could scour through books and could retain most of the knowledge. Most of these books are so abstract, so absurd that even now, when sometimes I read them, I'm like, what the fuck does this even mean? But back then, I could somehow understand what I was reading, and I could implement so many things with my life. In my life, I mean, I started reading with the grimoires of Solomon. Lesser Key, Greater Key of Solomon, Grimorium Verum. I used to read a lot of fiction as well. So I used to read a lot of Anne Rice back then. I was into chaos magic, so I read a lot of works by Austin Osman Spare, uh, derivatives of his techniques at least, not his own works. I read the Psychonauts Manual, which was, I think, the single most important book of my life back then, at least. Of course, since then I've read books that would far exceed the depth of that one. But that was the first book I found to be the no nonsense guide on how to really go inwards. I really like the word psychonaut, like the explorer of your psyche, like an astronaut explores the skies above, space. Yeah. So, the Psychonauts manual was something that really, really, really got me into it. Now when I look back at these very strange experiences of my life, I think A lot of the times it's now in, I mean, of course, because I've read Vedic literature, I think a lot of it has to do with Maya, Maya constantly pulling you towards itself. I think most of my downward spiral, most of my hedonism, most of that has been Maya trying to recapture my attention, because all of this used to happen. I used to get distracted the moment I made some sort of a breakthrough. For example, the moment I started making breakthrough in the Psychonauts manual, and going inwards, I remember I just became very materialistic, because I used to love earning money. I used to crave money. I used to want money. I used to work solely for money. I used to think that I'm going to make a better life for myself, and then I will do all of this. Then I will get into these more abstract concepts. I think it's Maya by most Vedic concepts. It's constantly the moment you make a breakthrough, it tells you, well, come back. There's this. It's like I use this analogy quite a bit. It's like Jesus Christ in the desert for 40 days and 40 nights, and Satan being Maya over here, and Satan is like, well, I can offer you the kingdoms of heaven, kingdoms of earth. I can offer you everything, and take a look at this stone and turn it into bread and things like that. So constantly this temptation by Maya, by materialism, by matter. The moment you start transcending matter, you know I don't know if it's sentient or not, but it's pre-programmed concept in the greater reality, where it's supposed to serve as a distraction. Otherwise, attaining higher awareness would be something that everyone can do, and then it wouldn't require any discipline, or it wouldn't require any life lessons. You wouldn't require any lessons to attain it. Then everyone would be able to. So around this time I got really really into conspiracy theories, and you know I got really existential around this time as well. But as I was saying, I was very hedonistic, very decadent. I think I was having an affair with solipsism, and most occult literature is very solipsistic in nature. I mean, quite a few Vedic concepts are also very solipsistic in nature. Solipsism is, that the observer is the only thing that is real, and everything else is fake. So you, dear listeners, aren't real. My parents aren't. Nothing is real, and I'm the only thing that's real because I'm the observer, and the observer creates their own reality. So I am in a continuous state of creating reality, of manifesting reality, like a lonely god. Like I am all that there is. I'm God, so I am all that there is. Nothing exists outside me, and I've created this elaborate illusion, uh, because if I don't, I might go crazy, you know like a lonely insane god. And the moment I die, because there is no observer, all of this ceases to exist. It's like that thing that they say, that if a tree falls in a forest, does it really make a sound if no one is there to hear it? Like this observer creating reality. It's a very strong concept in occult, and that is the only reason why they say that matter itself is malleable, and that's why rituals work. You could influence reality because you create it, and rituals are this ripple that you create. It's a technology that you use to create change. I guess I should have another episode for this concept alone. It's such a deep concept. It'll make you go crazy. I went crazy. I had psychotic breakdowns merely because I was so obsessed with solipsism. I got depersonalized. I didn't think I was real for a very long time. I mean, a few months at the very least. It was a scary, scary time. I used to feel like I was in this waking dream state, when nothing is real and I'm the only thing that is real, and everyone is a lie and everyone is an imagination, like I'm in Truman Show or something. That may very well be true, really. But the problem with a lot of occult traditions is that it's very easy to fall down this rabbit hole and get become decadent. Then it wouldn't matter. Well, I can then kill someone. What does it fucking matter? I can hurt someone. What does it matter? Everyone is a constructed thought form of my subconscious. And the only way I could pluck myself out of it was by internal dialogue and reminding myself that, well, if nothing matters, then why do I feel love or compassion and things like that? Why should it matter if I hurt something? If I've only created it, why should it matter? But it matters to me, right? It matters to me if people are hurt. If it matters to me if an animal is hurt. It matters to me because I've got love in my heart, because I've got compassion in my heart, and these things overpower this sort of identity crisis. Solipsism in part is true, by the way. You do create your own reality, you do manifest your own reality, but you are not the only thing in existence. um, if you were, you know it would be, I guess that's the difference between a psychopath and a normal person, or someone who can battle his demons. I think a lot of psychopaths are depersonalized solipsists. I think that's why it comes easy for them to inflict pain, but for us it doesn't. So that was as good an answer as any. Anyway, so as I was saying, there is some merit to that, a lot of merit to that, actually. But the difference is that we create our own subjective reality. Objectively, of course, we all exist. You know what I mean? Subjectively, of course, I am creating my own reality. Uh, but that doesn't alienate the fact, or divorce me from the fact that you exist and you are as capable of creating your subjective reality as I am capable of creating my subjective reality. That's what understanding is inherently. It is an understanding, or an awareness of some subjective rule that you live your life by, or some subjective insight that you have into yourself or another person's opinion of you. Um, anyway, that's another, as I was saying, a rabbit hole in itself, and it is very confusing to tackle this question coherently. And I think a lot of it has to do with internal dialogue, and finding it very difficult in terms of linguistic abilities to transcend the internal dialogue and convert it, transmute it into some sort of auditory expression. To take concepts so abstract and so fucking strange, to take those concepts and to transmute them, to imbibe them with some form of auditory expression. That transmutation itself, that transmutation itself, sort of takes a lot of the meaning away, I think. That's why language, I think, can be quite a big hindrance in effectively communicating these deep concepts. And I think that's one of the reasons why meditation is so important, to go inwards, to have a dialogue within yourself without the use of words, at least audible words. Inside your head, the speed of an idea is so great that you could live lifetimes within 5 minutes. The time becomes so subjective. So it's easier to have these questions and reflect on these strange questions within yourself than to bring them out and share it with someone and talk about them, because your journey inherently is your own journey. No one else is going to share your journey with you. I mean, people can walk with you for a significant amount of time, but they're still, even though they're walking with you, they're still walking on their path. All right, that's getting a little too new agey, so we shall move on. Okay. All right. So yes, coming back to the esoteric things that I was delving into. So I was really into these very strange things, and then in 2012, the end of 2012, actually, something like November or December, I had another very, very strange experience. Right when I had become very materialistic, I had a very strange experience, almost like there was this constant battle between Maya and some higher consciousness of reminding me that, well, there is more, there is more, there is more, there is more. So constantly trying to get me back on track, while Maya was trying to push me off track. So I had a very strange experience in the end of 2012, which made me question, what I was doing with myself, and why I was losing myself to such such petty, such materialistic aims in life. The moment I had that experience, I was back on track, and since then, uh, sometimes I have swayed. I will not deny that. There have been times where I have swayed from the path and found it difficult to come back to the path. But I've managed always without any need for some form of external great experience to bring me back on track. For the past 7, 8 years, I've managed to get myself back on track by internal dialogue alone, which I'm fairly happy about. So I've achieved a kind of stability in terms of knowing where to go. And even if I don't know where to go, things just sort of fall into place. That's another thing. I think the strange experiences I keep talking about that I've had are things I'm only talking about that are too fantastical to talk about right now. But on an average, I have deja vu and synchronicities very, very often. It's very often. I could be thinking about someone, and then they might call me, someone who I haven't spoken for in years, let's say. Maybe I'm walking, I'm in the market somewhere, and I run across someone who I haven't seen in years, but I was thinking about just yesterday. So a lot of synchronicities keep happening that ways. Also, deja vu is also something that keeps happening every now and then. Not as often as synchronicities, but has happened. These two things are strange within themselves. Um, yeah, I think the moment you start, when you're on the right path, I think synchronicities are the conscious universe helping you out a little bit. Anyway, I'm sort of deflecting from the path, um, from the topic being discussed. All right, you know, I think the see this particular podcast was called the Hermit of Metropolis, because I really want to talk a little bit about, in more detail at least, about the thing that introversion can do for you and how it tremendously helps. Also, this is around the same, the topics I will be discussing now are also questions that a lot of people have asked me on Instagram and Facebook, and because I put forth, an open end discussion where people, if they have any questions, they can ask me. So I will not be catering to one question at a time. I've collectively read them all, and as I speak, uh, most of you will get your answers because most of your questions were similar to each other's. So I know some of you asked me, very specific questions, but you know, uh, as I as I talk and I elaborate on this, most of you will have your answers. I won't have to um address each one. So yeah, I'll try though. I'll try nonetheless to address some of the questions that people asked me. But I don't think that will be needed because you'll get your answers. Most of you will get your answers. Um, okay, so introversion, I think is a significantly underutilized state of mind that is the beginning of detachment. Um, the sooner you become introverted, the better it is. As I've told you that before, that eventually everyone in life becomes introverted. Everyone who has some sort of an introverted disposition benefits greatly only if they know how to utilize it. Um, you know, my introversion has been such a dominant part of my personality that it has shaped everything from my interpersonal relationships to my career choices, my forms of self-expression. Uh, yeah, I mean, my introversion is a very strong part of me, and at this point in my life, I think that introversion has transcended into a certain form of detachment. Um, you know, mm, See, my introversion was inherent. It was something that was always in me, and it only manifested itself more and more with time. But a lot of people can become introverted due to external stimuli, tragedy, death, trauma of any sort. All these things can render you an introverted person, someone who goes inwards. So don't ever um, feel bad or sorry for being an introvert. I think it is, if utilized correctly, of course, it is one of the most conducive state of mind for higher awareness. You know, so I think it is very difficult for Indians as such to understand the importance of introversion because our society is not individualistic, unlike Western society where individual liberty matters and is of prime importance. I mean, Indian society is more based on face value, a sense of community. Um, uh, you know, what I mean by face value is something like, you do anything and people are going to say, well, you ruined my reputation. You ruined the reputation of your family. You ruined our name. Nakatwadi. Things like that are expressions that Indians use to convey dismay over individual choices, over some sort of community choice or something that you undertake in in consideration of a community. So everything from your career choices to your to the partner that you choose, to the children that you have and their career choices, so on and so forth, are all dictated by the community, and less on individual liberty. I think that is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for Indians in general to ever pursue higher spiritual concepts, because most of them would require some form of renunciation, maybe the traditional family life, maybe leaving your parents, things like that, which is something that is very difficult for Indians to get a hold of. And it wasn't as difficult in the earlier days. Most Vedic philosophy talks significantly about renunciation. Of course, it also talks about dharma and your responsibility towards your parents and community and things like that. But if you are chosen for a particular occupation, and it is an occupation, becoming a renunciant is an occupation of sorts. Um, People used to look up to these figures, but now it's difficult because now even more we live in communities even more congested than before. We live in bigger groups in smaller areas, so the sense of community is stronger now, unfortunately. It's not necessarily a good thing, um, but that's what it is. When I say stronger, it doesn't mean that people are out there to help each other. No, 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 no. Only for the bad things we have a community. Only for stopping someone from doing something that is good. Only from generally for nothing good. The communities that we have now is not something that is very conducive to individual expression or individual enlightenment. Uh, so yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why uh, Indian society now is not very conducive to spiritual evolution. I think people in villages and places like that have a better choice in with respect to that, because they still live in comparatively smaller societies. So that concept of face value and also a certain reverence for being a renunciant is more than what it is for us, you know. I hope I'm not boring you when you're falling asleep, but that's the point, you know. For me, you know, introversion has helped in such a way that see, I'm 29 years old now, and I'll be 30 in a few months, and because introversion or detachment now has been such a significant part of my personality, that you know, um, uh, people who are in my life, even before they get into my life, they understand what they're getting into, you know. Because I'm very good at setting expectations. You know, if you're my partner, let's say, or if you're a friend of mine, I set the expectation very early on that I am not available for. Well, generally, I'm a person who's emotionally unavailable. You know, especially for the mundane things. I'm not someone who likes talking much generally. I don't want to hear about your day, and I don't want to talk about my day as well. Things like that. You know, see, the thing is, I know it sounds very bad, but because I have grown spiritually over the years, I want to see people who are with me also grow. And if they don't feel like growing, that is completely fine. Then you stay in my life for as long as you want. I'm not holding you against your will, and I'm not forcing you to stay in my life as well. This is for everyone, you know, friends, family, cousins, lovers, everyone. Um, you know, I'm not holding someone at ransom saying, you know, stay, you gotta stay in my life. You know, it sounds terrible, but see, that's once I've reached this particular state, now that I have reached this particular state, and I have been only progressing in this state for the past 6 7 years. You know, anyone who is in my life, anyone, I want to see them grow spiritually as well. Now, I understand that a lot of people don't have those inherent curiosities. But if they do, you know, I am here. I'm here to satiate your curiosities. That is my purpose in their life. That is why my path converges with anyone. You know, most of you people must be here from YouTube and things like that, and that's predominantly my purpose for you as well, to see you ascend, to see you grow, you know, spiritual ascension of sorts. Um, you know, I'm not available for the mundane. I'm not available generally for the mundane. I don't enjoy, or I don't even find that particularly productive to talk about, you know, the generic troubles that you might have in your life. But if you want to grow, then here I am as your guide, as your spirit guide of sorts, as a lesser guru of sorts. You know, that's the reason why your and my path converges. Um, you know, but if ascension is not your goal, then I want to make it clear that I'm here for as long as you want me. I may be a very absent figure, you know, for my goals are of a much higher state of being, and not everyone can walk my path, and no one should walk my path, because my path is from my own choosing. um, you know, but if you want to walk with me, I am fine. I can't force anyone to purposely learn spiritual things, get better at it, uh, you know. But if you want to, I'm perfectly fine. I won't. Your staying or your leaving is irrelevant to me. If you find happiness with me, I'm perfectly fine. You know, you can stay for as long as you want. But if you want to leave, I'm not the kind of person who would also hold you and say, no, 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 please, please stay, stay, stay. You understand? I think that is what detachment is. I think that introversion, once you get, you know, once you get the awareness of that introversion, once you understand what that introversion is, that detachment is just the next logical step, and it happens naturally, and you don't have to do anything for it. You don't have to sit in a particular posture and pray to some entity. You don't have to take 5 different deep breaths to gain that particular detachment. I think that happens naturally as you progress spiritually. I think that's just a state of mind that you achieve when you commit to your spiritual practice. Um, yeah. Huh. As and that's the strange part. I think as as badass as I'm being about all of this detachment, one thing I still find particularly difficult to let go of are pets. Animals. I find that very, very difficult. I don't know why. And just a particular disposition, I guess. Very strange thing about pets is, though, I've been in this field of wildlife, and I've been a wildlife rescuer for about a good 10 years of my life. And there is some sort of inherent quality in me that is perfect for this kind of work, because I've rescued everything from snakes to birds of prey to rabid dogs, jackal pups, leopards, uh, for 10 plus years. And I've never been bitten by anything till now. Ever. There is inherent, I think, some sort of connection with animals. That's why I guess my parents even named me something very synonymous to it. Of course, it means something entirely different. Someone who doesn't blink, but that quality is there. Strangely enough, I think animals are much more attuned to higher states of consciousness, because um, animals, by the virtue of their nature, are not materialistic. You know what I mean? I don't mean simply in terms of earning money and things like that. Animals generally are very inwards creatures. They're very driven by emotions. They love, they hate, they're angry. Um, None of that is for any sort of malice or deceit, I guess. Um, Yeah, so we were talking about introversion as a tool. Now, before I move further, or no, actually, I should move further, and then I'll talk about things that you can do today to start your journey. Um, you know, Having friends or no friends, lover or no lover, family or no family, is irrelevant to the state of mind that a hermit has, to a detached person has. Within, you should be fine with someone being there or not being there. It shouldn't matter within to you. You understand me? You have five different people sitting with you, but if within you know that whatever the conversation is going on, with the five different people that are sitting in front of you, whatever the conversation is, whatever is being discussed, whatever is being eaten, whatever is being smoked, whatever is being not talked about, uh, whatever is going outside, the external, whatever is going on, is irrelevant to your internal state of being. If within you are far away from all of that, then it's perfectly fine to even be an extrovert. It's perfectly fine. That, of course, means physically an extrovert, someone who likes the company of others. It's perfectly fine. If you like people around you, it's perfectly fine. As long as within, your internal state does not depend on this external stimuli that you're getting. If that makes sense. All right, I want to talk a little bit about what are these archetypes, and how do they work. Um, See, I don't really think an introvert or a hermit or a sadhu or a shaman uh, or an astronaut are any different from each other. Really, I think they are more or less the same uh, personality state, or they're the same uh, archetypical thought forms, or archetypical um, streams of consciousness that you have plugged into, if that makes sense. They're almost the same, not very different from each other. um, um, yeah, Terence McKenna spoke about this once. there is this fundamental difference between these two major archetypes of a spiritual explorer. You have the priest and you have the shaman. Now, a shaman, a sadhu, an introvert, a hermit, and an astronaut are all the same personality types. All right, the same way a priest, a padre, an astronomer, um, a lab scientist, are all the same archetype as well. The fundamental difference between the two is that they rely on different senses to experience reality. The astronaut, the hermit, the introvert, the sadhu, the shaman, they all rely on their kinesthetic sense, where they touch and feel things and they see things with their eyes, and they're more internal in that aspect. That they're more out and about sort of a person. They like motion oriented things that are moving, their own body moving. So they're more oriented towards that. They're also more oriented towards more to do with feelings and things of more evocative, as opposed to the priest, the padre, or the lab scientist, or the astronomer. They're all people who rely more on their audiovisual. Um, they rely more on their audiovisual senses. The fundamental difference is, see, a lab scientist or a priest, let's say, let's just make it easier. A priest is someone who learns the mantras and learns the shloks and learns the prayers. He has a designated spot, in a temple, in a church, a Maulvi, in a mosque, something like that. They have this designated place where they sit in, and in that designated place, they learn theoretical things, and they pass on those theoretical things, making it more palatable for people that come to them. For example, someone who wants to get his marriage rites done or some sort of funeral rites, so just comes there for, I'm worried about something, and then the priest would say, the pandit would say, all right, this is your mantra, recite it and go back home. He will conduct the rites for you. He is at a designated spot. You can approach him anytime, and he will help you with the end to end rituals, everything that he's learned only theoretically. Now, as opposed to a shaman, an introvert, a hermit, or what was the other one? An astronaut. These are all people who are more of a risk taker, let's say. They like to, go out of their way. The shaman goes out to the forest and he sits in a cave, and he does high doses of illicit substances, and he goes within himself, and he touches things, and he learns by observing things, and he's more primal in that aspect, let's say. I think that's the biggest difference between the two. I think these personality types are more primal, and the priestly class is more civilized. The great truths that the priest learns are only from books generally, whereas the shaman goes out to the wilds and he learns it from there. He learns it from first hand experiences. He uses himself as a guinea pig and he experiments with himself, and he learns things after putting himself at risk. An astronaut puts himself at risk. An astronomer is only sitting in a lab, in a control room, checking the stars, looking through a telescope. An astronaut is actually going over there, not knowing if he might return or not. Um, that is the fundamental difference, I think. I think one can ascend to the other definitely. For example, I did myself. I mean, I was always a very kinesthetic learner, but most of my initial knowledge was from books. But then I experimented, and I experimented with a lot of different things. I went out to the wilds quite often. So, in that way, I learned more through trial and error of myself than I learned through books. Let me put it this way. I learned more through my own senses and through my own internal dialogues than I learned from reading books. And I think it is very important for you to find out what you are. Are you a priest, or are you a shaman? And only when you understand that can you actually understand what journey you have to take. So you can't take my journey if you are of a priestly class, and I cannot take your journey if you're of a priestly class. I cannot sit down and recite things and learn things and mug them up. I can't do that. I can't sit in one place. I'm so restless. um, you know I have to be out. By restless I don't mean can't sit quietly in one place, but I'm not accustomed to that, and that is not my inherent being. My inherent being is more motion oriented. um, so yeah, so it's important before you start your spiritual journey to understand your class. We play RPG games. You choose your assassin or your paladin or your yeah, your ranger or your soldier, warrior, all of that. So you have to choose your class before you start experimenting with your inner being. Does that make sense? So, since I knew that I was an introvert since childhood, my gradual progression, even though I didn't plan it this way, it turned out to be the shaman's progression. My occupational, my occupation eventually turned out to be more on a shamanistic note, on a sadhu note. Um, so yeah. Um, sit down with your own thoughts one day and have an internal dialogue with yourself and understand uh, what is it that which class, which occupation do you fall under, and then start your spiritual journey. Just a brief idea, maybe. If you find out, if you have an internal dialogue with yourself and you find out that you're more shamanistic, then I would suggest that you start learning self-reliance. uh, you know start learning things to do alone, on your own, going inwards. If you're more of a priestly class, then I would suggest that you start reading the old texts. Start reading the Vedas and things like that, and uh, you know go more in the theological aspect of it. So yeah, I hope that was insightful. um, the thing is, I only got into Vedic concepts recently. Like, I was 25 years old. I'm 29 now, so 4 years now almost. But I've made significant progression solely because I gave in to my shaman side. I was a risk taker, and I took a lot of risks. Risks that other people wouldn't fucking want to take. Like, I hung out with Aghoris, and I hung out with Nagas and things like that, and you know, I took a lot of solitary journeys, both inwards and outwards. Um so yeah, that's where my knowledge comes from, first hand experience by trial and error. Um, you know, See, the thing is that the reality that we live in, the reality that we call reality, is, when we say reality, we generally mean materialism, matter. The wall, the chair in front of me, the speaker, the mic that I'm speaking into. This is all matter because I can see, I can touch. It's all material. But how do I know it's material? Because it's defined by rules of physics. It's defined by rules of chemistry and biology, and by science. Let's just as a general uh, study, by science. But science is one way of understanding reality. Only one way to interpret reality. Science. Uh, but there are many different ways to understand reality. Science, as I said, is just one way. Meditation is another way. Psychedelics, psychedelic drugs are another way. attaining these states. You can attain these states in many different ways. Self-flagellation is one, fasting for extended periods of time is another. So there are a lot of ways to attain these states of mind, but uh, to see reality through only the lens of science restricts you tremendously to understand what the whole grand scheme is. And the grand scheme is only understood when you understand that there are different streams of knowledge through which you can understand reality. Think of it like the color spectrum, Vibgyor, let's say. So violet is, let's say, science is violet, and what is I? Indigo. So indigo would be, let's say, meditation. You know, blue is psychedelics. G is some sort of sensory deprivation, let's say. You know, so on and so forth. There are different ways to understand reality, and only collectively do they make sense. Solely relying on materialism, solely relying on science as one understanding of reality would render you a very nihilistic person. As much as people would say that it's a very freeing thought, it's not really. You know, uh, you'll be very depressed as a person, because I have been a militant atheist, especially when I became very materialistic in my early 20s. I was a militant atheist. I was a Dawkins sort of a militant atheist. And the one thing I remember is that I was never more depressed than when I was then. So, atheism and all is a way to understand a particular concept of reality, but there are many different ways, and atheism is predominantly a sub parameter of some sort of dogmatic science. But yeah, that's my point. There are quite a few ways to experience a reality. The mere imagination itself is a is a part of reality, a greater reality, because it is in your mind. You could create very elaborate scenes that are so fantastical, yet they serve no biological purpose, really. I mean, escapism maybe, but they're so abstract that generally they serve no biological purpose. To rely solely on science and understanding that biological, that most of our behaviors is serves some sort of biological purpose, would be very foolish on our parts. Even when you look at architecturally, people in the old days, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years old, uh, the architectural genius of those people, and then to say at the same time that they were idiots, they were superstitious idiots. I mean, we can't make similar things even now. The intricacy of certain temples, they're so intricate. I mean, the pyramids, to say that those people were idiots is extremely, extremely silly of us, extremely egoistic. And these people lived with the understanding that there were greater things at play than materialism. Maybe their science wasn't as advanced as us. Maybe the vaccines they developed, maybe they didn't have any vaccines. Maybe their medicine wasn't all that great. Um, but they were better than us in a lot of ways, architecturally at least. Strange when you think about it, really, how they were so advanced in so many ways, and we don't really give them any credit. We just call them superstitious idiots. All right, I think I'll go to. I'll just address a few questions that were asked, and I haven't been able to tackle them till now. Um, one of the one of the questions I was asked is, they're depressed, and how do you deal with that? I think um, you're very lucky to have depression, um, because, and this is me talking after I've battled depression for almost a decade or more. um, I think depression is another state of mind. Let me just say my piece, and then maybe I think people are lucky to have depression because it puts you in a zone of existential dread that makes you ask some very, very uncomfortable questions. That animesh, it can disassociate you as well. For example, I know that animesh is a character I play. Odd Ramble is a character I play. Absurdist is a character I play the lover, I play the son, I play the friend, the guru. I play all sorts of characters. With depression, it makes you ask these very difficult questions that you would never ask yourself if you were gleeful, let's say. You know, if you were happy generally, you would not even delve into these very absurd, very abstract concepts. Um, I think it becomes easier to understand uh, when you're depressed, at least, it becomes easier to go inwards without consciously trying. You don't have to sit in an asana and meditate and control your breath. When you're depressed, you're already in a state of mind where you're having a continuous internal dialogue with yourself. One of the greatest understandings that I had, insights rather, that I had when I was depressed, which was something that a lot of which later I found out that a lot of occult and Vedic and all sorts of ancient literature, or old literature, talks about, is that you know uh, the characters I play, when I understand that these characters are just characters I play, it becomes easier to understand that the physical form is a very small part of an infinite and abstract reality. You keep waking up. I think you die, you wake up, you die, you wake up, you die, you wake up, you die, you wake up. Even when you're living, you wake up, and then you go off to sleep, and you wake up, and you wake up, and you wake up. And it's not a singular act of waking, according to what people think. Enlightenment, I don't think, is a singular act. I don't think it's a particular spot that you reach, and then you awaken, and then you know everything. No, 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 no. I think you're constantly waking up again and again and again and again till infinity. That's why it's infinity. That's why existence is infinity. Your time doesn't exist. So future, past, everything exists simultaneously. These are insights that these are such existential insights that you can't possibly even think about these things if you're happy generally in life. I think you have to be very depressed. I think depression is a particular state of mind that makes you meditative without meditating. You understand? Everything is meaningless and all of that. These are profound truths, really. But they're only profound if you understand that you're the observer, that these are all characters that you play. If you become uh, um, uh, too entwined with this character that you play, if I become too entwined with Animesh, then depression can lead me to some very dark places without a glimmer of hope. But the moment I know that it's just a character I play, and I'm part of something greater, then depression makes sense as a particular state of mind that is meditative, introspective. You know? I hope it makes sense. I hope I'm not being too absurd. I think depression is a tool and necessary step towards, higher awareness. I don't think you can ask the right questions without depression. I think Jim Carrey said it perfectly, that depression is your body saying, fuck you. I don't want to be this character anymore. I don't want to hold up this avatar that you've created, and the world is too much for me. I think he says depressed simply means deep rest. That's when your body is craving deep rest. Your egoic concept is creating rest because it's becoming overwhelming. That you've tapped into this stream of consciousness, that these questions that you would have never asked yourself all of a sudden are now flooding your physical brain, and it's becoming impossible for your body. So, this chemical imbalance that happens within you, and you feel like it's too much. The day you accept, or the day you understand that you're an observer, I think that is a kind of enlightenment, a kind of awakening. But I don't think the act ever ends. I think you keep waking up. Some people will never wake up even once in their life. Some people will wake up 100 times in their life, in this life. Some people will take 1,000 lifetimes to wake up a singular time. So if you're listening to this, I urge you to wake up. I urge you to open your eyes and look deep within yourself and ask these very uncomfortable questions that maybe some of you are not even ready to be answered. But I urge you to ask them nonetheless. You don't want to, restart this game again and again. It might be difficult as it is the first time over. Why would you want to uh, plague yourself by constantly leveling up and then falling down, playing Bloodborne on hard, something like that? I've not even played Bloodborne. I mean, I have once, but not recently. All right, I will be answering some questions that people asked. Actually, I've answered most of them, but I'll answer some of them. I mean, one of them actually, only one. There is only one because I think that this person really needs an answer, and I would want to oblige. Where is it? I can't find it. God damn it. Okay, yeah. All right. So someone had asked me. Thanks for the opportunity. So I hold a full-time job, and I want to experiment on myself to push my limits regarding discipline and detachment. I'm not looking to change my life drastically or become an ascetic or anything. I just want to see how far I can go. I meditate for 15 minutes a day, and I try to practice mindfulness wherever possible. But I want to be able to go to the next step and push myself. Could you guide such people like me who wish to experiment on themselves and push the boundaries? The person who asked this question is very aptly named Existential Crisis. My dear, you are on the right path already. If you can manage 15 minutes, that is quite a commendable feat that most people cannot manage. Before I started meditation, at least the Vedic meditations, I could not sit for more than 2 minutes. I got fidgety and I got very restless in 2 minutes itself. Eventually, I reached 15 minutes, and now I can manage an hour and a half, something like that. Sometimes even longer. Um, you are on the right path, as I was saying. There's I don't know what kind of meditation you're doing, but certain meditations can definitely help you attaining deeper states of mind. Before you, however, do that, do whatever you're still doing, continue to do that. But instead of 15 minutes, try to increase it 30 seconds each week. And your goal should ideally be that within a month or a month and a half, you should reach something like half an hour. Half an hour is a very sweet spot. It's a very good spot. If you can manage half an hour, there'll come a time that without trying to exceed it by 30 seconds or so, you would automatically be able to go to 45 minutes, 40 minutes without trying. Because in your mind, you would think that it's not even 30 minutes till now. Just don't keep a timer. Once you manage to achieve 30 minutes and are stable enough that you don't require a stopwatch, then you've reached a very significant goal in your life, and you should pat yourself on the back for that. That said, I do think there are certain meditations that have really helped me transcend these linear time limits. One of them has been Brahmari, which I would definitely recommend to you. Brahmari meditation is something that Aghoris do. It is supposed to be sort of like putting yourself in self isolation, sensory deprivation sort of a place. So, what it does, what you have to do inherently is take your thumbs and plug your ears with that little flap that you have over your ears. I don't know what it's called, the cartilage, that thing over your ears. Earlobe, is it? No, earlobe is below, no? That's where you wear your earrings. No, the thing that extended cartilage, right where your ear is opening. With your thumb, press it in, and with the remaining four fingers, cover your eyes, and then hum like a bee. That's what Brahmari means. Hum like a bee now, like. as long as you possibly can. Keep doing this. Start with 5 minutes. If you can manage 15 minutes of whatever meditation that you're doing, you can easily manage 5 minutes of Brahmari. Um, Try to reach 7 to 10 minutes within a week and a half, and you would notice that the internal dialogues that you have in this state of mind are much more profound than anything that you've experienced before. Also, you would find that it can put you in a state of almost oblivion like trance, darkness, blank, thinking of nothing. That's the goal of meditation inherently. Either, two main goals of meditation really: to focus on one thing or to focus on nothing. um, so you can manage focusing on nothing. I really vouch for this kind of meditation, because this is the one kind of meditation that has really helped me. I mean, I've tried transcendental, I've tried strange Tibetan techniques, I've tried a lot of techniques by Patanjali, but this one was the one that helped me tremendously. Also, since I am a very strong advocate of supplementations, even to attain higher states of consciousness, as well as, of course, improving your body, I would definitely recommend that you do a little bit of research on shatavari. It's also called wild root asparagus. It is, it's got trace amounts of phytoestrogen, so it's very good for women. Generally, it's very good for women who are menstruating and things like that. It's very good for women inherently, is what I mean. Also for men. Now, predominantly on the physiological level, it works by helping women, menstruate properly and things like that, and then improve fertility and, of course, things like that. But at a more internal level, it helps attaining deeper states of mind, and also helps with lucid dreaming. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend Shatavari as a supplement that you can try to incorporate in your diet, and yeah, see where it takes you. Of course, that is the shaman in me talking. If you're more of a priestly mindset, don't listen to anything I'm saying, just try Brahmari. Huh. So, yeah, here I am, the observer, playing the role of the absurdist. I think it's a pretty lengthy first episode uh, of the podcast. I know I rambled quite a bit, but I hope you forgive me for that, and I hope you can take some insight from this uh, rather detailed monologue of sorts. Huh. I started recording at around 12. I think it's 1:41 now. So it's been a lengthy first session. As I said, I hope you enjoy it. And this is where I would end it tonight. I hope you ascend. I hope your third eye opens. I hope you dream of crazy things tonight. On that note, this is your spirit guide, the Absurdist, signing off. Take care and always ascend.